Thanks so much, Judy, and thanks to everybody who has joined in today. We are going to be talking about privacy in the metaverse today. I'm joined by an esteemed panel, which I think you're going to enjoy listening to today. We have Jennifer Vancini from Mighty Capital. We have Christy Steele from Sands Capital and Jeremy Greenberg from the Future of Privacy Forum. I'll let them speak a little more about themselves in just a moment, but let me start with some opening remarks about today's session. Our internet world is certainly evolving. We've emerged from the bunkers of ARPANET, if anybody remembers that. We've pushed the pedal to the metal on the internet information superhighway. We're propelling our way into the metaverse, and we're on a trajectory to the omniverse and beyond, right? These are all new phrases for us. It wasn't that long ago that words like blockchain and Bitcoin and NFTs and metaverse didn't exist outside of science fiction books. And in fact, the word metaverse is often associated with Stevenson's Snow Crash or Ernest Cline's Ready Player One novels, which so many people are familiar with. But the metaverse is far from science fiction. It's here today. It's a new channel. It's a new technology. It's a new industry. And we're going to talk about that in some great detail today. If we think of the metaverse as an extension of the internet, we need to think about all the problems and issues that we're dealing with in the internet, because the metaverse is really just an extension of that. Some of the things that we need to be thinking about currently and in the future are, we have this world where the internet brings good and bad things, but along with those good and bad things comes responsibility and challenges. And some of the problems that we face, the channel is sometimes often used for harassment or for hate speech or for misinformation. There's the argument that there's platform dominance and unfair competition. There are data privacy issues, there are data security issues, and all of these things have the ability to be exacerbated in this new metaverse world. The idea of a centralized virtual world has been brought into the mainstream most recently by way of our friends at Facebook, rebranding as Meta. Through Facebook and other platforms, we're seeing new marketing opportunities and challenges. We're seeing new privacy and security issues arising. We're seeing the investment community take great interest in this space. To quote Michael Gord, the co-founder of the Metaverse Group, it's inevitable that the metaverse will be the #1 social network in the world. Today's panel is going to look at the metaverse from a privacy, technology, and investment perspective. And let me now introduce our panel, and then we'll get on to the questions. So first, Jeremy, let's start with you if you'd like to say a quick hello.
Yes, thank you very much, Rick, for having me, and thanks to Wirewheel for putting on this great event. My name is Jeremy Greenberg. I'm a policy counsel with Future of Privacy Forum. We are a DC-based nonprofit that brings together advocates, industry, academics, and other thought leaders to promote responsible data use in emerging technology. And emerging technology, we definitely include the metaverse and related technologies under that banner. And I lead FPF's work related to immersive tech. So virtual reality, augmented reality, the metaverse, neurotechnology, as well as some other future-facing technologies.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Christy, we'll move over to you if you'd say a quick hello, please.
Thank you, Rick, and thanks for having me today. Really excited to be on this panel. My name is Christy Steele. I'm on the investment team at Sands Capital. We're an asset management firm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and I work on the early stage venture team at Sands Capital. We typically invest in startups around the Series A or Series B stage. There are two focus areas that we have in our venture fund that I work on that are particularly relevant to the panel today. So the first is digital life. That can include mobile gaming, AR, VR. Really more broadly, we look at it as the intersection between our physical world and our digital world. And that intersection is just continually increasing and overlapping. And then the second focus area that we have at SANS that's particularly relevant is identity intelligence. That can include cybersecurity, fraud, privacy, and other areas. And I should say too that we're an investor in Wirewheel. So glad to be here today, really excited for the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy, and welcome to the panel. And last but not least, Jennifer, say a quick hello, please.
Yes, thank you, Rick, and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you may be. I'm also really excited to be here. I'm a general partner with Mighty Capital. We're a Silicon Valley-based VC firm, and we also invest primarily in Series A, Series B, early growth stage companies, about 70% of which are B2B tech. We've got a couple of security plays in there. Many companies that help other companies build great products. We believe more than ever we're in the age of product, and the best products are winning bigger and faster than ever. And about 30% of our investments are in more kind of regulated special areas like blockchain, fintech, and health AI.
Great, thank you. So to those listening, as you can see, this is a really well-rounded panel. Some great insights, some great experiences from industry from these three panelists. And with that, let's get on some of the questions. As I mentioned, interest in the metaverse has certainly come into the limelight most recently around Facebook and their rebranding efforts with Meta. The global market for goods and services in the metaverse is estimated to be approaching $1 trillion in the near future. A familiar premise of the metaverse, much like the internet and the advertising that goes along with that, is that data is king. Control of data controls the markets. And so that's led to many conversations and many articles that I'm sure you have seen and read about how this prevents an unfair playing environment and creates disadvantages to new players coming into the market. Jennifer, Christy, you mentioned that both of your firms kind of focus on Series A, Series B rounds. So I think you're pretty familiar with emerging technologies and new businesses. How are your companies dealing with the barriers to entry in fighting some of the really big colossal behemoth companies that are out there that have been doing this for a long time? Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so it comes down to what is this company's moat, and will they be able to compete in this world with the giants? Some of the fundamentals are, of course, the team. Why is this team? What's unique about them to be able to achieve what they want to achieve in their space? If the product and the tech, are they best of breed at something that they're doing that will contribute to this metaverse? One thing we would look at closely is dependencies on APIs, right? What is the likelihood that they're, very dependent on one particular giant and that giant's API? What happens if, because of social pressure or competitive reasons, they decide to cut access or greatly change and frequently change what that API looks like? That's definitely a risk, and it's one that we assess when we're in diligence. And I think the other area we'll look at more intently in this sort of metaverse world is the ecosystem play for the company, because it is all about the compilation of these technologies and experiences. So what is that company's ecosystem strategy, which overlays a little bit with the dependency? I don't want to see dependency on one API, one company's network. I want to see you're covering 50 to 100 different things so that you have different areas to grow and different areas to exit and get acquired.
Yep. Christy, from your perspective, tell me how you guys are thinking about this and how your companies are thinking about this.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's difficult because really it is a matter of how many users do you have on your platform, how much engagement do you have. And so while there is sort of the high cost to build this platform, this type of platform to attract and retain users, at the same time, I think the reverse is true, that there are obviously very low switching costs, or not when you call them switching costs for users. Users will sign up very quickly for a new platform to give it a try. So I think one point I would make is just user experience and the quality or the diversity of experiences that a user can have on a new platform is really important. So as Jennifer mentioned, you don't want necessarily to invest in a company that is reliant on one major platform But there are game studios that are starting to develop really high-end, high-quality games for, say, Roblox, for example, which is unique on the Roblox platform. So looking at that user experience, because you can draw users, we've seen platforms like Axie Infinity build incredible user bases very, very quickly. That doesn't mean it will last. It's a huge challenge to compete with these other platforms, but that's one way. I think one important factor we look at. The other point I would make too is that we spend a lot of time, as Jennifer mentioned, I think looking at tools that work across a multitude of platforms. Sometimes that's the underlying game engine, or really just the underlying tool that empowers either users to build their own avatars, or a game engine that allows users to build new games or new virtual worlds. So that's a way I think that we try to look at this space, is through those tools or platforms that will empower users and businesses across multiple and any new platform that exists.
Yep. So a follow-up question on that. Do you see advantages to the smaller, nimbler, more adroit companies? Is there disruptive technology that the big boys aren't, or big girls aren't paying attention to yet, that that you guys have got your finger on the pulse of?
I think there are some specific spaces where a startup can be very, very specialized with a very specific focus, where they can draw users. I mean, one example might be in play or in-game advertising. So platform tools that are allowing developers to place advertising space within their games in a very specialized way to their games. So it's banners and other even moving or dynamic advertising space within those games. That's a niche space we've been looking at. It's growing. They will compete with all of the bigger players, which makes it a really challenging space to look at. But there may be one in there that can grow enough of a user base among game developers that it becomes really valuable and they can actually compete. So that's one example. There may be others.
Yeah, thanks. Jennifer, from your point of view?
Yeah, I think being specialized has its benefits, certainly. The one risk is if you're too specialized, then the company looks more like a feature
Yeah.
than a full product, let alone an actual company. If it looks like a small feature, it's way too easy for the big players to replicate what they're doing. And maybe, their exit from, we're as investors, we care about the liquidity event for us. So we're thinking about, is this IPO? Who's going to acquire them? If it's really just looks like a feature, it's an acqui-hire kind of proposition. But some interesting differentiation plays I've seen is companies that help brands build their own community within these metaverse frameworks, right? So wanting to keep that direct engagement with their users and provide that value. And I think privacy is one area where they can maybe have a leg up there, because it's very specific context for why they're communicating with you. You're already their customer. You're continuing to offer additional value in an ongoing relationship. So I'm seeing some interesting differentiation there.
Yeah, we'll talk about the value of those communities in just a second. Jeremy, let's transition this over to you. How are you seeing challenges, benefits to the startup market or disruptive technology?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to the metaverse, which no one knows exactly what the metaverse is, what it's going to look like, some folks think we already have metaverse, a metaverse of sorts today. It's going to be really important to make sure that the metaverse is not this like walled garden. This needs to be something like the internet that allows users to engage in various experiences and move between those experiences. So obviously you have the major players, they have the resources, the funding, the investment, the knowledge, the expertise, but you're going to need these other metaverse providers or companies to come in and be able to provide unique experiences to users. And this is definitely going to be a challenge. Some folks have talked about the importance in this space involving open source, open licensing, and these sorts of concepts to make sure new players can come into this space. And yeah, it's going to be really important. I think in terms of thinking about competition and privacy, there's definitely a privacy component to that. And with the metaverse, there are so many open questions and risks involving all sorts of ethical questions. A lot of them relate to privacy. And I think that, yeah, I agree that, maybe smaller companies, mavericks, creative folks can come in and say, hey, we're able to provide a more privacy protective experience or a safer experience. And that's going to be their calling card to really carve out their space in this future metaverse. But yeah, it can't just be one company. It has to be something continuous, but involving a lot of creative folks, a lot of companies with various visions.
Yeah, that's it's interesting the way you're looking at that, Jeremy. Let's explore the privacy part of that for just a second. We've all talked ad nauseum about privacy concerns around data in the traditional, what we are considering the traditional world now. What are you thinking about as you think about the new emerging privacy concerns and security concerns as the metaverse starts to unfold?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the concerns involving privacy relate to the scale of data being collected, a lot of it being sensitive, as well as the 3D immersive nature of the metaverse and of these technologies. So virtual reality alone, studies have shown that 20 minutes of VR can generate up to 2 million unique data elements related to an individual. But that's just virtual reality. If you have a metaverse that's integrating a number of technologies, VR, augmented reality, mixed reality, we have all of these different sensors, potentially all of these different cameras collecting this vast, vast amount of data. A lot of it is sensitive. It relates to the human body. We're talking about biometric data. You have some experiences today and some research happening involving collecting user heartbeats, skin temperature, eye tracking, all of the collection of this data. A lot of it is biometric, related to the human body. It's unique to an individual. It's very sensitive. The privacy risks are then magnified when decisions are made based on the collection of this data. And really in this space, thinking of the 2D web, collecting this information to build a user profile that decides which content to serve or not serve a user, which experiences they will have or not have. This can really cause things like filter bubbles, for example, and create all sorts of division, politically, culturally, whatever it may be. But in this situation, you have decisions being made, but in a 3D environment. So those decisions, they're not 2D, they're not just online or on your mobile device. They're potentially happening to the world around you that you're walking through and experiencing. So those are just some of the privacy questions. A lot of this technology is going to be used in public. So there are all sorts of questions about transparency and control over data collection of bystanders who might come into contact of someone using this technology. So there are a number of privacy concerns. A lot stem from just the amount of data collected and the fact that folks are going to be living in this 3D immersive environment where decisions are going to be made based on the collection of this data.
Yeah, it's a fascinating problem that we are facing. It's an interesting precipice of where the internet is evolving. If we use the metaphor of a human life, I'm guessing our internet maturity is somewhere between maybe middle school and AP high school classes. We're smart, we're snarky, we're coming up with cool ideas. We're not thinking about responsibility, but we think we're infallible, and we're gonna own the world one day, right? So interesting challenges. Let's pivot a little bit. Like the model that exists today, the metaverse is about, in many ways, data, access to data, control over that data, and the monetization of that data. Jennifer, Christy, I'll start with you guys on this one. How are you thinking about the I can't say that word, the monetization of data as a KPI in terms of current and future value of your investments? And what is the diligence that you're doing around data monetization and privacy in general as you're looking to back new companies? Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll go back to your analogy about where we are in school, right? We're not in kindergarten anymore. In terms of knowing, past history, there's suspicion, a little bit of suspicion around the metaverse, along with the excitement and curiosity because of past history. And we know it's about advertising dollars. Sort of got that in the early ages of the internet, but it took a long time to develop. And a lot of companies had, data as part of their business model, but weren't actually able to monetize that and show that they could really drive that as a huge part of their revenue. So I think from our perspective, it's going to be the proof is in the pudding. And that's partly why we invest at Series A and Series B. We want to see business model traction, proving out revenue model traction, where that's a key part of the business. To really assess it. So a company, I like to see if they have their core products and maybe how they can monetize that data in the future as part of the vision that they're working on strategically. If that's what they're selling now as their key business, I need to see that revenue traction to know it's really there. And I think it's so early to even know what the value of this data and this advertising will be. We certainly have, as Jeremy was really hitting the nail on the head, it's a compilation of all this data. My biometrics plus what's coming in from my microphone and my camera, you put all that together, you have new context. We don't know yet what that's really going to be worth to advertisers. We have an idea, but I like to see the proof. And then we know that there will be, because of past history, more guardrails, more regulation. How is that going to curb the ability to really monetize the data as we move into AP honors class? And out of middle school. So I'll pause there and let Christy say her piece on this.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I think in terms of diligence that we would do, we always, with every company we talk to that's dealing with consumer data, which is most of them, we certainly, the first test is simply how does this sort of feel as a potential user or consumer of the product or platform? Does it feel sort of icky? Does it feel inappropriate? Does it feel that a lot of my information is being collected and I don't really know where it's going or who it's being sold to? And if that's the case, we back out because it's just, we don't want to be involved in that type of product or platform. And I think it's also important with the founding team to get a sense that they're at least aware of the privacy challenges. And as Jennifer said, that it will evolve over time as it has with the internet. As everything is more interconnected, as we're gathering more data on users through gaming platforms, through virtual worlds, through their jumping between these spaces, we really want to see that the founding team or that the company understands that this will be an evolving challenge and they need to be as transparent as possible with their users about what they're collecting and how they're using it. And the second point I would make too is a space we're really interested in is influencer and creator marketing. And the reason I bring that up is because it's a different way for brands to access their customers and potential customers through creators and influencers who have built out these communities. So we have an investment in this space, company #paid. They connect influencers and creators with brands who want to share their message and their products with potential customers. And it's a great way to access, the people who will probably be very interested in your product, who you otherwise might find through collecting and analyzing their data. But in this way, you're reaching communities through people who have built those communities. So it's just another way of sort of approaching that.
Yeah. Thank you both. So Jeremy, wear your hat. You're the chief privacy officer. You're the general counsel, and you've approached Christy and Jennifer for money. And they say to you, so tell us your privacy story. How are you handling you're a metaverse company, if that's the right way to phrase this. How are you handling data collection? How are you handling notice and choice? How are you talking about privacy? What are the things that you're thinking about different as a meta company versus as just a traditional, sort of online retailer, online marketer kind of company?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, just to begin, I think the transparency and control element of this piece is really important. So today on the 2D web, with technology that consumers are interacting with today, there really isn't great transparency. Privacy policies, folks don't read them. If they do read them, they don't understand them. So I think rethinking transparency in this space is really important. So one suggestion would be is to really take advantage of the immersive nature of this technology when it comes to transparency. So when thinking about, what data is collected and for what purpose, it could be providing an experience, it could be something like advertising, something else. It's really important to get creative here with the user. I recently saw an academic article drafted by a PhD student that looks at the possibility of creating a sort of like 3D voodoo doll in an immersive world where the user basically sees a version of themselves as this 3D agent, and they're able to see, what data is being collected from what part of the body. They're able to, click on each, select each, get an explanation of what this data is being used for. And that also provides a user control. They might say, well, I don't really want my eye tracking to be captured in this experience because that is viewed as something particularly sensitive. So I think giving that sense of transparency and control to the user is really important. Of course, the onus can't only fall on the user. Granular controls can be great, but it can also be overwhelming. So I think that another thing that's really important, sort of a baseline thing here, is to think about some current privacy enhancing technologies or techniques and mapping them to this 3D space. So something like processing on device where possible. So in-sensor computing for VR, for example, engaging in federated learning. So trying to do as many things on the device as possible so that extraneous data does not touch servers. But yeah, other than that, I think just, a commitment to engage in these engage in collecting and sharing user data responsibly is really important. We don't quite know what that is going to look like in this space, but really getting a sense of, okay, what is the sensitive categories of data here? And, should these be used for certain purposes? Maybe using eye tracking data for advertising is not an ethical decision in this space. I could see a company thinking that, so they use other forms of data to provide information to advertisers. So I think it's really complicated, but I think getting the notice and consent or transparency and control piece right, as well as making those commitments, using these technologies on the market and trying to develop them in a 3D space. That's sort of, I think, the floor in terms of what companies should be thinking about right now with the metaverse.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think transparency and choice and technology is probably a pretty good three-pronged approach to that. Christy, I'll start this with you from a technology point of view. Are you seeing what have you seen that is interesting new privacy-forward technology that addresses some of these kinds of things, or the ways in which your companies in your portfolio are thinking about applying technology to privacy?
Yeah, I think, I guess one example I would actually point to, and this is not a company we've invested in, but our firm has done a fair amount of work on Roblox, just learning about the platform. And that's one that really stands out in my mind, is they have obviously a very young user base, but they've created a platform that is very secure. And through research and reading that I've done, it seems that parents are very comfortable with their kids using the platform and their safety on the platform, which I think stands out to me compared to other platforms where you do not hear that feedback. So I think that it is going to what Jeremy said, where there's simply just transparency in what is being collected and how it's being used and where it's stored and all that. Really, I think that's what makes a company stand out to is just the clarity on how they're handling privacy today.
Yeah. Jennifer, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, it definitely is the Flores clarity of how they're handling it, but I think there's also the context for it, right? So if I'm a company with location-based technologies, that's relevant for curbside pickup. Maybe Best Buy needs to know exactly where I am. But it shouldn't be the thing that's put out there first, watching me walk around New York City and see exactly where I'm going and that sort of thing. So some of the transparency around context and just having a privacy first mindset is very helpful. There's certainly the opportunity for business models around privacy as part of the product value that you're giving the consumer or the organization. Companies are trying to figure out how much will people actually pay for privacy. Security is something people don't like to pay for as individuals, right? They expect it to be baked into their products. But there certainly is a slice of the population that would gladly pay whatever dollars per month to have privacy. Or, there's some discussion about how can I, at the center of my own metaverse, be my own little entity and sell my data, sell the use of the data for whatever purpose you want to use it for. So I think we could see a lot of creative models that do put privacy not just in the background as the checklist, but kind of forward in terms of new product value and features.
Yeah, it's interesting. That the challenge, I've been in the data business most of my career, and the challenge has been, and I've been in many heated discussions with people who have tried to get a business off the ground or just too many conversations over too many cocktails. But how do you allow the consumer to monetize their data? And let them control their own destiny, and nobody's come up with a good model for that yet. The concept of building privacy by design into the engineering team mentality, into the executive suite mentality, is a critical point, and it's not the topic of today's discussion. But I think we need to see that as something that becomes ubiquitous. That it's being taught in engineering classes in college, and that it's being deployed at companies from the corner office on down, so that the customer doesn't have to pay for privacy, that privacy is inherently baked into the code, into the effectiveness of the product. Certainly is something that we should be thinking about. So we've talked about privacy, we've talked about technology. Let's talk about it from a different point of view. Social media algorithms promote engagement-driven revenue. Maximizing time on the site maximizes the amount of advertisements that are sold. Maximizing time on the site maximizes and focuses, for better or worse, on the content that gets presented to you. And there's been great debate in the last 4 years. As to what information we're being presented with, and what it is that is the truth, and what it is we should believe, and what I see versus what you see, because I clicked on an ad and now I'm getting a rhetoric that says I should think this way, or rhetoric that I should think that way. Where does government play a role in this? Do we need to pass new laws? Are we going to self-regulate ourselves? How do we need to think about this? Jeremy, you and I have talked about this in a previous session we did on VR and AR. I'll start with you. Where does Uncle Sam fit into this discussion?
Yeah, it's so difficult right now to get Congress to pass any law. Obviously, so for anything to pass, for any sort of amendment or revision, that's obviously an uphill battle. But when it comes to thinking about the metaverse, it's going to involve all these different technologies. We don't know what it's going to exactly look like. We don't know what tech it's really going to entail. We have an idea. We have an idea of the types of data that might be collected and used or shared for what purposes, but we still really don't know. So I think, and this could be something that, it's sort of industry and academia meeting with Uncle Sam, something like that. But I think an important initial first step before any sort of legislation would be to have standardized definitions and to really know what we're talking about and engage in policymaker education. When we talk about things like virtual reality, there's sort of more or less consensus over what that is. But we don't have standardized definitions. We don't really know. There's a lot of confusion around this technology. There's a lot of hype, and it's really important to separate fact from fiction. And as well, when we're thinking about risks, to think about the risks we're seeing today, sort of what we can learn from the past when thinking about data and technology. But also, thinking about near-term risks. What are the likely near-term risks versus the more far-out attenuated risks? So we really need to sort of have an understanding about what we're talking about. And then when it comes to potential legislation, we have some privacy laws on the books in the states. We don't have our federal comprehensive privacy law, but really thinking about the definitions we have today. So the way that biometric data is often defined in a lot of biometrics laws and privacy laws, it's based on identifiability, the ability to identify a user. But the privacy risks in the metaverse, they might relate to identifiability, but also to the inferences you can draw from the collection of this biometric data. Understanding, my likes, my dislikes, my psychology based on my eye tracking data, for example. If eye tracking becomes integrated into, broadly into these consumer devices, that my eye tends to move towards certain content rather than other content. So that's going to inform the sorts of content I'm going to be served. So I think really rethinking some of the definitions we have out there, and yeah, I think that's really just a first step. And then in terms of where private sector fits in, I think making those internal commitments. We have a lot of companies that have come out with their ethical principles, especially related to AI and machine learning, which definitely overlaps with this technology. But yeah, I think that's really just the first step. And yeah, I think even just knowing where we're going with this technology and the lay of the land, we need to get that down first before we really move forward in, I think, a meaningful way in terms of regulating this technology.
Yeah, I honestly, Jeremy, I think that's brilliant that we're thinking about it as how do we define what it is first before we regulate it, right? I think makes a lot of sense. Jennifer, Christy, Jeremy is clearly more on the policy side. You are more on the business side, but how are you guys thinking about things like this? Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Yeah, these are clearly difficult areas because what's the balance between the government, the oligopolies and monopolies, and then the end users? It's impossible to say it's really a free market in terms of the content being served up to us, because our metaverse has come down to a very tiny microverse, and there are risks inherent in that. As an investor, we don't look to solve those problems, I guess. We look for companies that are building products people want, and building excellent products. And some of this, there's definitely room for innovation around how to deal with these issues and make sure that the user experience is as rich as possible. And then the best products win in the long run, ultimately. But I have to leave it a little bit to the policy people. My one comment on this is government. We do need a common understanding of what it is. The government, large bodies do not move as quickly as this technology is moving and the uses of it, right? So that we're always going to be playing catch up to some degree. And I hope that, let's say 10 years from now, the way we will have handled this and gotten to that point will look much better. It's not going to be perfect, but maybe it'll look better in terms of the issues we're dealing with than where we're at now. with polarization of information and that sort of thing, having started without really trying to direct the train in the right direction. So,
Yep. Christy, thoughts from you on this?
I think anything I say will be repetitive. I guess just I mean, we haven't necessarily as a whole industry, tech, et cetera, handled, I guess, privacy that well up until now. We have a lot of challenges on the existing platforms, from Facebook to Google to anything out there. So I think it's a challenge. I don't necessarily know. It would be great if there could be some clear regulations that companies can try to follow as they build their products. I imagine it will occur in tandem, and I think it's really complex. I don't think there's an easy answer.
Yeah, I'll morph on this question just a little bit more and add now the component of what is the responsibility of the business itself. So imagine if you can use your superpowers for good and evil. I'm going to quote, and I hope I'm quoting the right article. I think this was from the Wall Street Journal, and I apologize if it's not, and who the author was. But I'll quote a scenario. So imagine a world where we're all wearing headsets and we're looking at the US Capitol building. Most of us have an overlay that says this is the building where Congress works, but some people might see an overlay that says on January 6, 2021, our glorious revolution began. I'm using that just because it's a topical one. I'm not picking sides on this argument, but what is the responsibility of business in the spirit of free enterprise, in the spirit of truth in advertising? What is the responsibility of the business? And what is the responsibility of the investment community beyond turning a profit to invest in businesses that are grounded appropriately? Christy, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think so. Our team at SANS has spent a fair amount of time on, and this is slightly different, but very related, AI and ML model risk management. And so companies that are actually, their business model is around allowing companies to ensure that their models that they're building and their platforms that they are building are protected and are ideally not biased and are following the necessary standards, really to get away from the black box. So I think that there is a whole, there's really a whole set of companies that's actually independently addressing this topic, tools and platforms and overlays that companies can use to ensure that what they're building is transparent, that there's clarity around how decisions are being made about data collection and data usage. So in a way, we've actually started to look at this as a separate category that we hope companies will use these products in terms of analyzing potential risk and being clear on that risk. I guess that's the way I might address that question.
Yep. Jennifer, how about from your point of view?
Yeah, I agree. It's about transparency and how they're thinking about it. And Christy said something earlier about the icky factor. You know, if there was one company we passed on because it looked like they were a little bit Cambridge Analytica-ish in terms of they would be using data for very, specific political targeting on both sides of the aisle. It wasn't, particular to any party, but it was very much about manipulating experiences. And so there's definitely that as investors, and there's a movement in investing, much more emphasis on ESG, which is a really broad category, environmental, social governance, super broad. We're going to see, I think, a lot more frameworks in terms of reporting on that as investors. How do we assess it? What are our companies doing? So I think there's going to be a lot of room there to use that sort of movement to aid in the transparency and reporting and communicate how we're thinking about it. And for any company looking to raise money, they need to know their audience and what investors are looking for. So I think in the end, as investors, the power we have is where we put those dollars, and it will shape the product or the companies that we see coming to us and what they're pitching.
Yeah, thank you. So let's talk a little bit more about the money part of it. It appears that in many of these online virtual environments that transactions that happen often are based in a currency, crypto. And we could do a whole session just on crypto and Bitcoin. And that's we don't have to go completely down that rabbit hole. But what does the future of the space look like? And where does blockchain and I'm putting some big categories in, probably unfairly, into the same conversation, but blockchain and Bitcoin and crypto and the privacy associated with that. I'm not sure my exact question here, but Jeremy, from somebody who tracks the space, I'd be curious your thoughts on that. And then Jennifer and Christy, how does the influx of crypto as part of their business plan, does that challenge you or excite you or scare you as a potential portfolio company? Jeremy, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah. So when you bring up blockchain, this is a term that's thrown around a lot, kind of like Metaverse, and there's a lot of hype around this term. But a really interesting sort of line of thinking that's developed when it comes to blockchain in this space, as well as the more traditional 2D gaming space, when thinking about things like it could be currency or even virtual property or someone's avatar, which is going to be something that's really important in the metaverse. You're going to have to express yourself digitally. Being able to use something like blockchain to have someone be able to port or use their avatar across experiences. So today we have a number of popular, VR social experiences. We have a lot of gaming experiences, and often you have the user creating a different avatar for each. But what if a user is moving between different universes and different experiences seamlessly in the metaverse? They might want to have that consistent representation. A lot of folks have talked about blockchain as being a technology to make that happen in a privacy protective way. So that's something that I think is really interesting and specific to gaming, but also I think the metaverse space as well. And in terms of virtual currency and virtual property, you have NFTs, and people are talking about crypto and all of this. We don't exactly know where that's going to go, but it's going to open up all sorts of fascinating discussions, I think, about ownership and thinking about, the legal side of this whole issue, virtual ownership of goods or currency. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the courts, because it likely will. So yeah, it's a big question, and we'll see what happens with it.
Yeah. Jennifer, Christy, how are you thinking about this from the perspective of potential companies to put in your portfolio?
Blockchain is definitely one of the emerging areas that we're focused on. We've got a great company in our portfolio in that space now that helps other companies add blockchain into their apps. It's early, but I think it has enormous power to bring more to the user to be able to control their experience. We talk about gaming a lot, but healthcare, to make healthcare data more portable, it is one of the use cases that we're seeing in the enterprise. So I'm really excited about it. I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between blockchain and cryptocurrencies yet, because it is early. Even sophisticated investors that don't invest necessarily in tech. I was explaining this to somebody last week. They thought it was one and the same. They didn't realize there are other applications for blockchain. So that's an indication it's still an early market. But to the extent that a company can leverage blockchain to make their products, their experience stronger and better, I think it's fantastic. Cryptocurrencies, we'll see. I think it's great where it can help an ecosystem develop. We're going to see regulation. Maybe it's going to be the tax powers that ultimately get their nose into the space to make sure that it's, we're never as private as we think we are when we owe taxes to the US government. And there are issues, definitely areas for abuse with money laundering and that sort of thing. But that's since the dawn of time, we've had these issues. It's just another technology to manage in that space. But I think it can be very empowering.
Yeah. Christy, anything to add there?
In terms of, I guess, digital payment methods, I do think that there is obviously a need for quick digital payment methods across a variety of use cases. The interesting thing specifically in gaming and whatever the metaverse will become is that I think what we've seen thus far is pretty much a walled garden approach where each platform is creating its own currency. So you've got Robux in Roblox, you have different currencies in almost every platform. And in a lot of cases, users are purchasing that currency and they can't pull their fiat back out. So I would imagine that's how that proceeds in the metaverse. I don't envision various platforms making it easy for users to transfer their assets. And I guess I use that broadly, not just their Robux, but their avatars, etc. I would imagine this proceeds as a walled garden. The idea of interoperability doesn't necessarily serve the platforms running their platforms. They don't want to lose their users and allow them to jump easily. So I think it will be a push and a pull, but it's certainly an important technology, but I think it will probably continue to be developed in that walled garden.
Yeah, thank you. Folks, we have rapidly come to the end of our session. I'll ask one last question of you in sort of a round robin format. Answer as briefly as possible. We fast forward 3 to 5 years, 10 years from now, when technology has advanced, that the quality of the imaging that we see in 3D and virtual environments is indistinguishable from reality. What does the metaverse, what does the omniverse look like 3 to 5 years, 10 years from now? Christy?
Yeah, so I think we all have a vision in our minds, whether it's from Snow Crusher or Ready Player One or any other number of films we've seen of this virtual world that we're all living in all the time with some headset or whatever the technology is. I think in reality, and the way that we look at it at SANS, is that there's this continuous overlapping of our physical world and our digital world that gets a little bit more to the augmented reality, wearing, whether it's a pair of glasses or contact lenses, or an implanted device, other, consumer wearable or medical grade devices that we're wearing, where we're continually uploading and downloading more information from the virtual world. That's the way I see it going. I don't know quite how quickly that happens, probably very quickly. I think within 5 to 10 years, we'll just see a significantly increased data flow back and forth from every individual.
Yeah. Jennifer, from your point of view, quickly, please.
Yeah, human nature, we overestimate what we can do in the short term, underestimate how much can be done in the long term. 3 years from now, maybe we'll see a couple of breakout cases and disruption that are super interesting. 10 years from now, we'll be talking about a completely different set of companies. In my opinion, some of the mega giants we know today could be the Yahoos of tomorrow. So let's just see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jeremy, close us out. Take us home.
So in the next 3 to 5 years, I think the metaverse is going to be really idiosyncratic. It's going to be funky. It's going to involve all sorts of creativity, like what we saw with early internet. It's going to be wild. And then I think 10 years from now, I think you're going to have broad adoption of this technology. Folks who haven't heard of any of this today are going to be participants in the future. And we are going to move between physical and digital worlds seamlessly to the point where we might not even be cognizant that we're doing so.
Let's hope that evolves in a utopian versus dystopian world. To my panelists, thank you. This was a brilliant session. Time went by very, very quickly, thanks to you. Judy, I will turn this back to you to close this out.
Yeah, thanks everyone for a really great discussion. So this concludes the privacy in the metaverse section. Rick, Jeremy, Christy, and Jennifer, thank you for speaking. Thank you for joining us. The next session will take place at 1:30 Eastern time in about 5 minutes. Privacy operations and practice. Please join us by going to the portal and logging in. Thank you very much.